This episode of the Seventh Valkyrie Podcast is brought to you entirely by fan support. To help keep the series ad-free, get early access and bonus features, browse gear and apparel, join the community, or watch the series come to life in living color, you can check out the links in the description. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Seventh Valkyrie Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Sharp, and it's interesting. After last week's podcast was a lot about finding hope, and this one, I guess it's like, and I was talking about, doom scrolling is a dangerous, unpleasant world. Everything's in a bad spot. And it's funny that I talk about all that stuff because I usually, and I get this from a lot of people, is that I'm a very positive guy in my daily life. Like, people say, like, oh man, you have so much energy, you're full of boundless joy and shit. And fuck it, I'll take it. Like, I'm so glad to know that bringing joy to other people and sharing it with them works. And I love knowing that, like, I put out good energy into the world, but it's always interesting because one of the things I hear from people sometimes is like, oh, it must be great that you're just like that. And it's funny because I'm certainly not, a little bit is natural, like I've been high energy since I was a child, but I'm definitely not just like this, like, positive and focused on giving good energy to people when I'm out and around them. Like, I'm not naturally joyful or naturally kind at all. Like, naturally, and you could ask my parents about this, I'm kind of a little bit of a selfish, impulsive individual. I can have very little consideration of others, and I have a mean streak if something doesn't go my way, and I also have a little bit of mild generalized anxiety. I guess it's sort of like the social media problem. Like, we see all the results of other people and we see them being happy on the outside, and we don't see all the work that went into it, which in my case was decades of therapy, like an incredibly supportive and emotionally intelligent set of parents that even to this day, even to like yesterday, continue to normalize personal improvement, both in my, in our lives and in theirs. And then just a little bit of psychiatric medication to kind of get the brain functioning, kind of just knock it back to balanced a little bit more. Anyway, but my own personal health journey and mental health journey isn't the main point of this episode of the podcast. Like, even with all of that help, I didn't magically become just a joyful person and like all, zipping around like, oh, zippity doo dah, how are you doing? You doing okay? Like, because, people, one of the things that a friend of mine actually asked was like, is it exhausting being like that? And it's a good question. Like, and I answered that not really, now. So I just sort of stumbled into a self-fulfilling cycle that I actually see repeated a lot, kind of in the concepts of karma and like put good energy out there, you receive good energy back. But it's something that I actually really, really believe. I believe that if you consistently give out joy, if you consistently choose to look on the bright side, if you choose to forgive, if you choose to show genuine excitement at seeing people around you, at the accomplishments of people around you, in time you'll actually train them to do the same way with you. It's a weird thing. Like, if you smile at someone every single day and show that you're happy, and not just happy, but happy to see them, like they improved your day, like eventually they start getting happy to see you. Like, if you're talking to, and this is a thing in a small town particularly, like if you're talking about a person in the service industry, like behind the counter at your local restaurant or bagging groceries, like that little smile, or asking them, like, or asking their name, or remembering their name, or like remembering that little thing that you said last week, like it might be, a highlight of their day. And, maybe the rest of their day might be shitty, but maybe you'll, when you show up, they're like, hey, it's Colin, like it's a little spark in my day. Now, if you just go around once in a day and you're just nice to everybody for one day and you go back to just like, well, just kind of coming on with my life, like, and then you expect that everybody else is going to be super joyful, it doesn't work that way, or at least not usually. But if you continue over the course of time to bring joy to others wherever you can, like in turn, you start to become one of the best parts of their day. And then you're not just holding up the entire equation. You're only holding up one side. And now they're returning the joy to you. And now you get energy from seeing them. Like, when you start improving other people's days, they start to improve the people in their lives' days by being more joyful, and then they have more joy to give, and they have more joy to give back to you. And then the cycle continues, and you have cultures like, small towns in Costa Rica where like that cycle of giving and that culture is inherently more positive and more, generous, and and it leads to good things. I think that the opposite can actually happen too. You can have scarred and damaged or just like hyper-capitalist, greedy communities where individuals have been hurt by great traumas or fear or hate or like just the ruthless competition. And it creates this mentality where people want to hoard joy. Or you want to see the world as like a place that's going to take stuff from you. So you're always on edge and you're not just giving out joy happily. And, it makes it harder for that to flow and to kind of have that positive cycle. One of the things I was thinking about is you can see how like people who suffer from depression and just depression in general can be a very negative self-fulfilling cycle as well. Maybe someone's having a bad day and like the barista sees that and, maybe they show you some joy, or maybe they're busy too and they just kind of avoid you or look at. And the next time you're having a bad day, like you see your same barista and they're kind of like, well, whatever, it's this guy again, because they're having a bad day and you were having a bad day again, and now all of a sudden that's making you have an even worse day. And then, when you don't have sources of joy and the support of other friends, like if you're happy, like for example, if that interaction is happening throughout your life, like every moment you are bumping, it's like you're just not in a good space, and then you don't have joy to give, and then people are like, oh, well, they're negative, so stay away from them. It's not, it doesn't create more. It can create this very unpleasant cycle of less. And, that cycle of depression and bad days, like obviously there's a clinical aspect to it too, but I know and I've hypothesized that there's, because I've seen people in my life who are negative and it just leads, and it's like it can become toxic, but not because they're intending to, just because they don't have any joy to give right now. And then if people aren't willing to love them and support them and show them that love, then it can be in a really shitty situation. So all that to say, like, that's why I try to put joy out in the world whenever I can. And sometimes I'm not perfect, and sometimes I do it for selfish reasons because I know that ultimately being a good person to other people benefits me. I've seen it. Like if the greed, but I, at the same time, like if the greediest thing that I'm doing is making the people around me happy so that they'll be happier for me, I mean, I guess that's a good form of greed, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's a good way to go about life, whether it's for self-serving or other serving purposes. Putting out joy whenever you can is an empathy and understanding. You don't always have to be happy, but you can be empathetic and understanding and positive. And I don't know, it's funny. In the Seventh Valkyrie, you live in a world that's sort of in the opposite. Like you can see a world that rushed to escalating violence through its, in the war that happened 7 years before the story starts. And in the aftermath, you have some scarred communities and some that are kind of willing to move on. And, we kind of explore how those societal shifts happen where certain leaders and heroes can come in and shift the tide with nothing more than their perspective. So you have these kind of places tipped on a knife's edge where it's just as easy to turn them into like positive and generosity and kind of get the cycle moving positively, or you can get into the cycle of violence and mistrust. And it's funny, I'm thinking of a specific moment again in season 2 that I can't wait to share, so stay tuned for that. And but yeah, I think it's just an interesting little quirk of the universe, I'd say. If you give in and you give positivity and you kind of be willing to let the buck stop with you with negativity, and you instead provide joy. And slowly over the course of time, you have people who are willing to do the same for you, and people who are willing to look on the bright side and willing to give you the empathy and the benefit of the doubt. And it's hard to get that started, especially if you've got a long history and a long cycle of like negativity and toxicity, or you just don't have people who are ready to handle that kind of behavior. So obviously, if you're out there having a bad time right now, that's not to say that that's your fault. But yeah, this is just a little thought/observation I've noticed that I hope you guys can all find a small way to be aware of or implement in your own lives. So anyway, love you guys very much, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Seventh Valkyrie Podcast, which is brought to you entirely by fan support. To help keep the series ad-free, get early access and bonus features, browse gear and apparel, join the community, or watch the series come to life in living color, you can check out the links in the description.